Hey, so I'm gonna do a live stream while laying down this time. Gone pretty hard in the gym the past couple of days, and um, just uh, my muscles are a little bit upset with me. Just doing some strength building, and I wanted to talk about something. So I've just been uh, using some Khan Academy and Crash Course while I'm just laying here. Specifically computer science and in Crash Course. So that's less about like learning computer science and more learning about computer science. It's pretty interesting. It's very, very helpful for me to understand the history of things. And I've been going back and forth between that and geometry because I'm finding that without a foundation in geometry and algebra, a lot of programming can seem pretty abstract since it literally has a lot to do with abstractions. So I've been teaching myself beyond what I originally learned, which was up until pre-algebra, which is ironic because when I ended up taking the GED on a dare, I crushed it in the math section. But I'm just really good at taking tests, so that was a lot of guessing. I guess I kind of have a system for cracking those types of standardized tests. But anyways, so I wanted to talk about proof and proofs and the proof. And I've been talking about this a lot the past year, and I was just watching a geometry video on angles and proving to yourself that, you know, certain types of angles with straight line, well, like any of these like supplementary angles with straight lines are equal. They're always equal. And I wanted to talk about this real quick because this is something I struggled with for a long time. I didn't understand the difference between, like, you know, something that is of the scientific method or of empirical data. So there's data that comes from a scientific method experiment, and then there's data that comes from empirical evidence. The biggest differentiator that I see is when it comes to the kind of data that the human brain records on a daily basis, it's pretty much all empirical. So our personal experiences, they're empirical data. So it doesn't necessarily mean if other people do the exact same things we do in a situation that they will experience the same results. That being said, like a bodybuilder could lay down and, you know, they said, all right, you just keep your arms straight and then you lift and then for whatever it doesn't work for somebody else because they don't have essentially that empirical evidence to prove it to themselves that it can be lifted because they're missing certain pieces of data, like the bodybuilder works out all the time and they never work out. So the bodybuilder can lift 350 pounds, but they can't. So that doesn't mean that it's absolutely wrong. It just means it's absolutely wrong for them. And this is something I find really interesting because science was initially at odds with religion like a few hundred years ago. So they wanted to get away from empirical evidence altogether, it sounds like, from the history of things. They wanted proofs. And I find this really interesting now because I think this is why I'm so drawn to data science, because it's about studying the empirical data and data sets and stuff like that, figuring out what's relevant and what's not, looking for trends, micro trends, nuance in big data sets. The kind of thing that the human brain does naturally. It doesn't always mean it's right, but if you can find a rhythm, it's kind of like, musical notes. It doesn't matter if it's right or the best. It's either a pattern or it's not a pattern. So it's not quite as objective as in the realm of right or wrong, but it is pretty subjective in a way where, like, if you identify a pattern, it depends on the application whether or not it's right or wrong. So in that sense, it's subjectively either not right or not wrong. So while studying proofs about this, I was really, really interested with geometry. So, like, they have these geometric proofs, which are different than the type of proofs that I learned just from listening to people over the years. And I realized that there are a few different ways that people use the word proof. You have proof. Let's label proof as in whatever we believe to be proof of something. So proof in itself in this term is a belief. And then you have proofs. Proofs are things that, regardless of belief, if you do them, they always objectively provide the same results. Like, if you're taking two straight lines, the angles that mirror each other are always the same. So these are proofs in this context. Those are proofs. So you have proof where, like, somebody could say, like, well, yeah, you know what, like, I've seen two straight lines that cross, and, like, the angles, I know they weren't exactly the same. Like, I just know it. Like, in that can be because of a lot of things, the fallible nature of human memory. Maybe they just want to be a contrarian, all sorts of things. And that's what I would consider proof. So when it's humans trying to sell other humans on proof, that's what I consider proof. Proofs are things where, like, you can say, like, well, here's the logic. You can try and disprove it. You can try and find the exception to this rule. And these are these logical constants that, regardless of belief, they provide the same results in experimentation. And then you have the proof. So the proof is essentially, it's theory. So people can have, proof of something where it can be personal proof, or, like, I know that if I do this, it consistently provides good results. It's like, I know if I cut out, like, this thing from my diet, it provides consistent results. But somebody else, that might provide them negative results. So these are, when we're talking about, like, subjective realities that have a lot of nuance, like our own personal experience, there are certain things where, like, you got proof where if somebody says, well, I believe this, and they're just telling a story, but, like, they just want to be a contrarian. They're not claiming it to be, the proof that, like, it's absolutely right. They know that they've seen an exception to the rule, whether or not it's personal or made up. That's proof. Proofs are mathematical, they're logical, they're objective, they're reproducible without belief. And then you have the proof. And the proof is really, really interesting, because the proof it's kind of like what we get out of bed for. The proof is like love. Like, it's paradoxical, it's irrational, it's rational, it's everything in between. The proof it's the context, it's the big picture. The proof is why somebody believes in this story as opposed to this story. It's why somebody practices chemistry instead of biology. The proof it's that personal preference. It is the thing that it could be based on objective truth. It could be based on subjective truth. It's irrelevant. The proof is irrelevant whether or not it's objectively true or subjectively true. I've seen a lot of atheists, they proclaim that science is the proof of everything that they believe or don't believe. Whereas, like, people in religion all the time say this is the proof that our God is the one true God, or that this is the way that God is, and it's something more than just the universe or the wind or, you know, irrational patterns, which are naturally occurring as well. And I'm really, really interested in the way that humans use proof. I think that pretty soon we'll be able to have empirical evidence of everybody's proofs, and we'll be able to see the context of everybody's proofs. And I think that will be a very interesting time when we can share, you know, our proofs as easily as we can share, like, a Facebook page or, you know, profile or, you know, username or whatever. Like, how interesting will that be to see people's proofs, whether or not it's objective, subjective, how we come to the conclusion of that individual, how they can have rational and irrational beliefs in their perfectly unique cocktail. And I'm really, really interested in these things, because my biggest dilemma right now is, how do we communicate our personal proofs without having to believe one another? And a lot of that has to do right now with the fact that it's so difficult to communicate those things, because we don't have a way to share them without sharing our stories, and that's difficult. Like, you could sit down and write a book and go into detail or answer questions for the rest of your life, but at the end of the day, like, that's unrealistic. But it could be useful, especially in a data overload society, to have the ability to look at this nuanced context of people we love and care about. I think it will save the world a lot of heartbreak, a lot of confusion, a lot of painful discussions, if we can privately challenge our own beliefs, our own context, to better understand those we love around us, or better understand people we want to get to know, just to better communicate with one another. I think we've been so divided that we think that, you know, objective proofs don't exist or subjective proofs don't exist. But in reality, we use pretty much the same word in different contexts. Like, in the context of this live stream, like, I essentially created 2 new definitions of the word proof and pretty much abstractified the current definition of proof for probably a lot of people. But that's really just to show that there's a lot of nuance in the world that I think it's funny, because, like, we try and objectively prove a lot of things. I think, interestingly enough, the rational movement over the past couple hundred years has pushed even theologians to objectively prove a lot more. But the deeper we go, the more nuanced things become, the less clear things become. In fact, like, if we're not careful, we can accidentally oversimplify or overcomplicate almost anything that has been studied rationally over the past couple hundred years, because things are both simple and complicated at the same time. That's what nuance means. It's like, you are just one person, but you are also an accumulation of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of ideas and, you know, millions of moments of experiences and, like, all sorts of things. So it's nuanced, but you're also you, and you're also, you can be simplified, but you also can't be simplified absolutely, and you can't be considered to be complicated absolutely. Like, we're both complicated and simple at the same time, and this is kind of true about anything that exists in the universe. Like, everything is both simple and true at the same time. This is something that even scientists struggle with. They want everything to have very complicated explanation broken down into bits and pieces to be able to have, proof of correct labels and structures and whatever, even though, like, there's, sometimes ancient knowledge that uses the same logic but different terminology, and, instead of trying to believe in it, like, they just look at it as something that exists. That's not about whether or not we believe in it. It's to help us understand, not proof that, like, certain things exist, which is quite interesting. And I think we're getting to a time in history where, like, we're getting out of the objective science age and we're getting into the subjective science age, which is more along the lines of the nuance science age, the data science age, where it matters why you're doing something and not just how. I think that's really, really important, because I think, science is on the brink of, like, disproving itself as well as proving itself, and religion is on the brink of disproving itself as well as proving itself, and they're going to help each other, both prove and disprove themselves, to the point where we realize, like, what's the point of these divides? What's the point of absolute proof? Like, if there's 8 billion people, there's 8 billion different versions of proof. And then there's also objective proofs that can be proven without belief. And then there's also, subjective proofs that are like, proof that, Star Wars is the best sci-fi franchise ever. And, there's also proof that Star Trek is the best sci-fi franchise ever. Like, those are subjective proofs, and one can believe in them absolutely, but if you tried to prove it absolutely, you're only going to create a divide between two different groups of people. And I think we're eventually going to figure out how to have a bridge between these divides. We don't all need to live on one world, to keep on the sci-fi analogy. We don't all need to, like, live on the same world. We don't always need to live on the same world we grew up on either. There are many different ways for us to live life. And I think it's really, really important that we have an open mind to explore people that think different, so we don't get stuck in, this isolation where we push people away who think different, or we push people away who, don't validate what we believe, either consciously or subconsciously. And it's really, really interesting to see where, figuring out those dark spots in my mind and learning math to help me learn code. And, it feels like I'm off track, but I'm also breaking things down to basics. I was overcomplicating things by not just simply starting with mathematics. And I hope this was helpful for you. If you want to check out more of my stuff, please feel free to check it out. My vlogs on YouTube. I think it's About Time with a question mark. You can find me on Instagram, Jace Not Chase. You can find me in my group, my social learning group, at libraryofconsciousness.com. That's www.libraryofconsciousness.com. And join us. Check out the units in there. Posting everything that I'm exploring to learn, either over the past year or in the past. Keeping track of things regardless of belief, whether or not I believe them, just things that I've researched and studied and am interested in at some level, either to prove it to myself or disprove it. Typically just to see what can be proven and what, can't, and understand how to navigate my own mind and consciousness and discover myself somewhere in the middle. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And see you soon.